I died a disgraced failure, stripped of my Stanford scholarship and completely disowned, all because the school's golden girl couldn't stand being second best. But when I opened my eyes, the ink on my AP Calculus final was still wet. This time, I wasn't going to be the victim. The sharp, overwhelming scent of Chanel Chance and peppermint gum hit my senses first, dragging me back from the crushing darkness of a shattered windshield and twisted metal. My lungs violently expanded, pulling in the stale, over-air-conditioned air of a classroom. I blinked, my vision swimming, until the blurred shapes in front of me sharpened into agonizing clarity. The rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, the scratching of number 2 pencils, the agonizingly familiar scuff marks on the linoleum floor. I was sitting at a desk, my desk, the one in the 3rd row of Mr. Harrison's AP Calculus AB class. I stared down at my hands. They weren't scarred from the brutal delivery job accident that had claimed my life. They were unblemished, gripping a yellow Ticonderoga pencil so tightly my knuckles were white. Beneath my hands lay the free response section of the final exam. I looked up at the whiteboard. May 12th. A cold shudder ripped down my spine, leaving a trail of ice in my veins. I was back. I had actually come back. It was exactly 3 years before my life would end in absolute ruin. 3 years before the depression, the bankruptcy of my parents, and the utter destruction of my reputation. And it all started today. I didn't need to turn around to know who was sitting directly behind me. Harper Kensington, the undisputed belle of Oak Ridge High. She had the glossy blonde hair, the effortlessly perfect smile, the wealthy trustee father, and the absolute lack of a moral compass. In my previous life, I was just a naive, hyper-focused scholarship kid who thought hard work was a shield against the world's cruelty. I hadn't realized that for girls like Harper, my hard work was just a resource to be harvested. In that past life, Harper had sat behind me during this exact exam. I had finished early, exhausted from staying up all night, and rested my head on my desk. Harper had seamlessly slipped her phone from her designer sleeve, zoomed in on my test booklet, and copied every single one of my meticulously calculated answers. But she didn't just steal my work. Knowing our identical scores would trigger an academic audit, she struck first. She planted a crumpled cheat sheet in my backpack during 4th period. Then, the moment the results were posted, she marched into Principal Davies' office in fake tears, claiming I had been craning my neck to copy her answers. Because her father practically funded the school's new athletic wing, they didn't even question it. The security footage of the testing room mysteriously corrupted. My Stanford acceptance was rescinded. My parents spent their life savings fighting the expulsion in court, only to be crushed by the Kensington family's high-powered lawyers. A soft, rhythmic tapping broke my train of thought. It was the sound of Harper's manicured acrylic nails drumming against her desk behind me, a signal of her frustration. I glanced down at my test. I had completed it, but I hadn't moved my arm yet to expose the answers. In my past life, I moved my arm in exactly 2 minutes to take a nap. Not this time, I thought, a dark, unfamiliar thrill of adrenaline pooling in my stomach. This time, Harper, you're going to burn. I didn't cover my paper. In fact, I subtly shifted my body to give her a better angle. But before I did, my pencil flew across the scratch paper. I didn't just write the correct answers. I drafted a highly specific, fundamentally flawed proof for the final, most heavily weighted equation. It was a beautiful mistake, a complex, multi-step derivation that looked like genius but possessed a fatal flaw in the 3rd step, substituting a negative derivative where a positive one belonged. It was the kind of error only a brilliant student could make, and an idiot would blindly copy. I finished the flawed proof, left it exposed on the edge of my desk, and waited. Behind me, I heard the faint, almost imperceptible click of a smartphone camera shutter, disguised by a forced cough. Gotcha. I immediately picked up my eraser. With swift, methodical strokes, I erased the flawed proof from my actual exam booklet, leaving only faint indentations. I then wrote the correct, flawless proof on the final page, closed my booklet, and raised my hand. "Mr. Harrison?" I called out, my voice steady, slicing through the silent tension of the room. The elderly teacher looked up from his crossword puzzle, peering over his spectacles. Yes, Emma, we still have 20 minutes. I'm finished, I said, standing up. I didn't just walk to his desk. I carried my booklet, my Scantron, and all my scratch paper. But Mr. Harrison, I have a request. I need to file an immediate exam score review protocol. The room went dead silent. Even the scratching of pencils stopped. Behind me, I could practically feel Harper freezing in her seat. Mr. Harrison frowned, clearly taken aback. An immediate review protocol? Emma, those are only used if a student suspects a severe testing, irregularity, or environmental compromise. I am aware, I said, projecting my voice just enough so the overhead microphone, the one attached to the classroom security camera, would pick it up. I suspect a compromise. I feel deeply uncomfortable with the seating arrangement and the integrity of the environment behind me. I am requesting that my exam be sealed immediately, signed across the seal by both of us, and graded strictly by the district superintendent's external board, not the school's internal software. Harper's chair squeaked loudly. What is she talking about? Harper whispered loudly to Liam Foster, her quarterback boyfriend, sitting in the next row. Her voice trembled, but I could hear the rising panic beneath her manufactured confusion. Emma, this is a very serious request, Mr. Harrison warned, lowering his voice. Are you making an accusation? I am simply protecting my academic integrity, sir, I replied smoothly, looking him dead in the eye. Please, seal it. Reluctantly, Mr. Harrison pulled a tamper-evident envelope from his drawer, a standard College Board requirement rarely used. I slipped my test inside, sealed it, and signed my name across the flap. He did the same. I will also be filing a time-stamped irregularity report with the State Education Board via the student portal right now, I added calmly, just to ensure there is a digital paper trail. I walked back to my desk to grab my bag. As I passed Harper, she was staring at me, her face pale beneath her expensive bronzer. Her phone was hastily shoved half under her thigh. Our eyes met. I didn't look away, and I didn't look scared. I gave her a slow, chilling smile that made her flinch. The game had changed. And she had no idea she was already caught in the trap. The next morning, the atmosphere at Oak Ridge High was electric, with post-exam relief. But for me, it was the calm before the storm. I walked through the crowded hallways, clutching the straps of my backpack, hyper-aware of every movement around me. During fourth period, just like in my past life, we had a fire drill. The piercing alarm forced everyone to abandon their bags and exit to the football field. I knew exactly what was happening inside the empty locker room. Harper had paid off a sophomore to slip a folded piece of paper, a meticulously crafted cheat sheet with my handwriting perfectly forged, into the front pocket of my backpack. When we returned, I didn't touch the pocket. I didn't even open my bag. I just sat at my desk and waited for the intercom to crackle. It didn't take long. Emma Collins, please report to Principal Davies' office immediately. The secretary's voice echoed through the PA system, tight and formal. Whispers erupted around me. I stood up, my face a mask of serene indifference. As I walked out, I caught sight of Harper. She was leaning against a row of lockers, holding court with her friends. She gave me a look of pure, theatrical pity, pressing a hand to her chest. Enjoy the performance, Harper, I thought. It's your last. When I pushed open the heavy oak door to the principal's office, the scene was exactly as I remembered it from my nightmares. Principal Davies sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his hands steepled, a stern, judgmental scowl etched into his features. To his right stood Mr. Harrison, looking deeply uncomfortable. And sitting in the plush leather chair opposite the desk was Harper Kensington. She was already crying. Not ugly crying, but a delicate, practiced weeping that made her look fragile and victimized. A single perfect tear rolled down her cheek as she clutched a tissue. Have a seat, Emma, Principal Davies commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. I sat in the chair next to Harper, keeping my posture impeccably straight. I'm going to get right to the point, Miss Collins, Davies began, leaning forward. We have a severe breach of academic integrity on our hands. The AP Calculus exams were run through the grading software this morning. Both you and Miss Kensington scored a 98%. A highly unusual score for this specific exam, Mr. Harrison chimed in softly, and the free response answers were practically identical. Because she copied me, Harper suddenly sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I studied for weeks, Principal Davies. I stayed up every night, and Emma just sat in front of me and I saw her craning her neck. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get her in trouble, but she stole my future. I let her cry. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. Furthermore, Davies continued, his tone turning lethal, following a tip from a concerned student, we had security search your locker and belongings during the fire drill. They found this. He slid a clear plastic evidence bag across the desk. Inside was the crumpled cheat sheet. This is grounds for immediate expulsion, Emma, Davies said, practically salivating at the chance to please his biggest donor by protecting his daughter. Your scholarship will be revoked. I am preparing the paperwork as we speak. Are you finished? I asked. My voice was so calm, so devoid of fear, that it made Davies blink in surprise. Harper's fake sobbing hitched for a fraction of a second. Excuse me? Davies bristled. I asked if you were finished, I repeated, crossing my legs. Because before you print any expulsion papers, I think we need to wait for Dr. Edward. Davies' face drained of color. Dr. Edward? The district superintendent? Why would he be coming here? Right on cue, the office door swung open. A tall, distinguished man in a sharp gray suit walked in, carrying a slim leather briefcase. It was Dr. Dylan Edward himself, accompanied by the school's quiet IT technician, Toby Miller. He's here, I said softly, looking at Harper, whose fake tears had suddenly dried up, because I applied for an exam score review yesterday at 11:05 a.m. 24 hours before you graded the test. 24 hours before Harper came crying to you. Harper stiffened, her manicured nails digging into the arms of her leather chair. What does that mean? She stammered, dropping the victim act entirely. Dr. Edward stepped forward, his expression grave. It means, Principal Davies, that Miss Collins filed a formal time-stamped affidavit with the State Education Board yesterday morning declaring her testing environment compromised. She specifically named Harper Kensington as the individual attempting to copy her work. That's a lie, Harper shrieked, her voice pitching into genuine panic. She's lying. She cheated. You have the cheat sheet. Actually, Dr. Edwards said, opening his briefcase, Miss Collins also attached a digital scan of her scratch paper to that email. A scan she took with her school-issued tablet in front of the classroom camera before handing in her test. I turned to Harper, letting a slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Do you remember the final equation on the free response section, Harper? The derivation of the velocity function? Harper swallowed hard, her eyes darting between her father's friend, the principal, and the superintendent. Yes, obviously. Then you should know, I said, leaning in closer to her, that I intentionally wrote a massively flawed proof on my scratch paper. I substituted a negative derivative where a positive one belonged. It was a fake answer, Harper. I left it out, let you photograph it, and then I erased it and wrote the real answer in my sealed booklet. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear Harper's erratic, shallow breathing. Dr. Edward, I continued, never taking my eyes off the girl who had once destroyed my life. Could you please open my sealed exam booklet and compare it to Harper's? Dr. Edward pulled the tamper-evident envelope from his briefcase. The seal was still intact, bearing my signature and Mr. Harrison's. He sliced it open, pulled out my booklet, and then looked at the printout of Harper's digitized test. The color completely vanished from Dr. Edward's face as he read them. Miss Collins is correct, Dr. Edward announced, his voice echoing like a judge's gavel in the cramped office. Miss Collins has the correct derivation. Miss Kensington's paper contains the exact, highly specific mathematical error that Miss Collins submitted as a decoy in her time-stamped affidavit. No, Harper whispered, shaking her head frantically. No, Daddy won't let you. You can't. Oh, it gets better, I said, my voice dripping with ice. I looked at Toby, the IT tech. Toby, did you pull the security server logs like I asked you to yesterday? Toby, usually shy, stood a little taller and pushed his glasses up his nose. Yes. At 11:30 a.m. yesterday, there was an unauthorized attempt from a device registered to Greg Higgins to delete the testing room's security footage. But because Miss Collins filed the State Board alert at 11:05 a.m., the system auto-locked the files. We have the 4K footage of Harper Kensington using her phone during the exam. Principal Davies looked like he was going to have a heart attack. He slumped back in his chair, staring at Harper in sheer horror. The Golden Girl's perfect facade was cracking, shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of my eyes. She looked at me, her chest heaving, genuine terror finally replacing the manufactured tears. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Checkmate," I whispered. The suffocating silence in Principal Davies' office was abruptly shattered. The heavy oak door didn't just open, it practically rebounded off the wall with a violently loud crack. Enter Richard Kensington. He was a man who wore his wealth like a weapon, draped in a custom-tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than my parents' entire annual mortgage. His face, normally a mask of smug patrician authority, was flushed a dark, furious crimson. He strode into the room, entirely ignoring me, Dr. Edward, and the IT technician, zeroing in exclusively on the principal. "Davies!" Richard barked, his voice echoing off the walls. "My assistant gets a hysterical call from my daughter saying she's being ambushed in your office. I pay for the new athletic wing, and this is how you treat Harper? I want this scholarship rat expelled by the end of the hour, or I'll have your job." In my past life, that exact threat had worked flawlessly. Principal Davies had folded like a cheap lawn chair, sacrificing my future to appease his billionaire donor. But this time, Davies didn't speak. He just sat there, physically shrinking into his oversized leather chair, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He looked at Dr. Edward, silently begging the superintendent to absorb the billionaire's wrath. "Mr. Kensington," Dr. Edward intervened, his voice a calm, gravelly baritone that commanded instant respect. "I am Dr. Dylan Edward, the district superintendent, and I suggest you lower your voice. You are not in a position to make demands, nor are you in a position to threaten school personnel." Richard stopped dead in his tracks, finally noticing the tall, imposing man standing near the desk. The sheer arrogance in Richard's eyes wavered for a fraction of a second, before hardening again. "Edward, what is the state district doing in a routine high school disciplinary matter?" "There is nothing routine about this, Doctor," Edward countered, stepping forward and handing Richard the clear plastic evidence bag containing the forged cheat sheet, along with the printed scans of the AP Calculus exams. "Your daughter is not the victim of academic theft, Mr. Kensington. She is the perpetrator of it. Furthermore, she orchestrated a malicious framing attempt against Miss Collins." "Preposterous," Richard spat, not even looking at the papers. He sneered at me. "Look at her. She's a desperate charity case trying to drag my daughter down to her level. Harper has a 4 gigapascals. She doesn't need to cheat." "Her 4 gigapascals might also require a retroactive audit," I interjected smoothly, my voice slicing through the heavy tension. I didn't shrink away from his glare, because if she's willing to pay a sophomore to hack the school's security servers to cover up her actions today, who knows what she's done in the past? "Hack the servers?" Richard's face twitched. He snapped his gaze to Harper, who was now hyperventilating in her chair. Her hands clamped over her mouth. "Harper, what is she talking about?" "It's a lie, Daddy! It's all fake!" she sobbed, but her voice was shrill, lacking the confident manipulation she usually wielded. I turned my attention to the superintendent, Dr. Edward. "For the official record, I believe Mr. Kensington needs to see exactly how Harper copied my exam. It wasn't a general similarity. It was a mathematically impossible coincidence." Dr. Edward nodded gravely. He took the printed scan of my decoy scratch paper and placed it flat on the desk, right next to the printed copy of Harper's final exam submission. "Calculus relies on absolute precision," Dr. Edward explained to the billionaire, tapping his pen on the complex integration by parts problem at the bottom of the page. "Miss Collins deliberately engineered a highly complex, fundamentally flawed mathematical derivation. She left this decoy visible. Your daughter copied it, stroke for stroke, completely unaware that it was a mathematical dead end. I watched Richard's eyes dart to the paper. To make it agonizingly clear, Toby, the IT tech, projected the images onto the wall monitor behind the desk. Evidence Exhibit A, the calculus derivation trap. Elamon, the mathematical proof submitted. Emma's decoy, copied exactly by Harper. Int 0 pi x sine x dx igual a minus x cosine x 0 pi cosine x day x pay no pay. Emma's actual sealed submission. Int 0 pi x sin x dx igual a minus x cosine x 0 pi int 0 pi cosine x dx p plus sine x 0 p. As you can see, Mr. Kensington, I said, pointing at the projection. In my decoy, I intentionally neglected to distribute the negative sign properly during the evaluation of the bounds, incorrectly deducing the final area as $pi. It's a subtle mistake if you're just looking at the shapes of the numbers, but a glaring, fatal flaw to anyone who actually understands the calculus. Harper copied the pi dollar exactly. Meanwhile, my sealed, time-stamped test contains the flawless derivation resulting in the correct positive pi dollar. Richard stared at the math. He might not have been a calculus teacher, but he was a businessman. He understood the undeniable, cold, hard logic of a paper trail. Furthermore, Dr. Edward added, his tone utterly devoid of sympathy, we have 4K security footage of your daughter photographing Miss Collins' desk. We have the digital logs of Greg Higgins attempting to wipe that footage from our servers at 11:30 a.m. yesterday, a device we have already confiscated. And worst of all, we have the planted cheat sheet. Dr. Edward picked up the plastic bag. Miss Collins never touched her backpack after the fire drill. The security cameras in the hallway show Greg Higgins slipping this paper into her bag while the building was evacuated. We pulled him out of class 10 minutes ago. Faced with federal cyber tampering charges, Mr. Higgins confessed immediately. He stated your daughter paid him $500 to plant the note and wipe the servers. Wealth can buy many things, Mr. Kensington, Dr. Edwards said softly, the weight of his authority crushing the remaining air out of the room. But it cannot buy a new reality when the facts are this heavily documented. Richard Kensington's jaw slacked. The arrogant fire in his eyes extinguished, replaced by a cold, hollow panic. He looked at Harper, not with parental concern, but with the furious disgust of a man whose prized investment had just tanked. You fool, Richard hissed at his daughter, his voice a venomous whisper. You absolute, careless fool. Harper completely broke down. The manicured, untouchable queen bee of Oak Ridge High descended into an ugly, hyperventilating panic attack, sobbing so hard she choked on her own breath. She reached out for her father, but Richard physically stepped back, disgusted. I sat there, perfectly still, watching the exact nightmare I had lived 3 years ago happening to the person who deserved it. There was no pity in my heart, only the profound, settling peace of absolute justice. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely uncompromising. Once the state education board was involved, the Kensington family's localized power over Oak Ridge High evaporated. You can buy a principal, but you cannot easily buy a multi-district superintendent armed with time-stamped state affidavits and a confession to a cybercrime. By the end of the week, the pristine image of the Kensington family was reduced to ashes in our small, affluent community. Dr. Edward did not mince words when he handed down the finalized disciplinary actions. I sat in my living room with my parents who were shedding tears of relief and pride, entirely unaware of the alternate timeline where their lives were destroyed as we read the official letter from the school board. The consequences Harper faced were absolute, immediate expulsion. Harper was permanently expelled from Oak Ridge High for gross academic misconduct and conspiracy to frame a fellow student. Invalidation of records. The college board was notified. All of her previous AP scores were flagged and invalidated pending a thorough fraud investigation. Rescinded acceptances. Her early acceptance to Yale, a spot secured largely through her father's donations, was officially revoked. Legal repercussions. Because she paid another student to access and attempt to delete secure district server data, local law enforcement opened a juvenile cyber tampering investigation. But Harper wasn't the only casualty of the trap I had set. Principal Davies, the man who had been so eager to ruin my life without a shred of due process, was placed on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave. The school board launched a massive internal audit into his disciplinary history regarding low-income scholarship students, heavily implying his career in education was permanently over. As for me, the district superintendent personally oversaw the unsealing and grading of my AP Calculus exam. I scored a 100%, a perfect, unassailable score. A month later, graduation day arrived. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the buzzing excitement of hundreds of teenagers preparing to step into the rest of their lives. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the deep green fabric of my graduation gown. I traced the edge of the gold valedictorian stole draped around my neck. My hands didn't shake. I looked at my reflection, the bright, determined eyes, the unscarred skin, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I had done it. I had navigated the treacherous waters of my second chance and rewritten my destiny. The crushing weight of the depression, the bankruptcy, the fatal accident, it all felt like a distant, fading nightmare. It was a ghost that could no longer haunt me. When I walked across the stage that afternoon, the applause from the auditorium was deafening. I looked out into the sea of faces and saw my parents in the front row, beaming with a joy that I had fought tooth and nail to preserve. I didn't see Harper Kensington. She wasn't there. She was a ghost of a different kind now, vanished into the disgraceful shadows of her own making. Later that evening, long after the ceremony ended and the celebratory dinners concluded, I drove my father's beat-up sedan to the top of Miller's Hill, overlooking the glittering lights of the town. I parked the car, stepped out into the cool night air, and leaned against the hood. I pulled a crisp, cream-colored envelope from my pocket. It bore the unmistakable crimson crest of Stanford University. It was my full-ride scholarship confirmation, officially finalized and heavily protected by letters of recommendation from Dr. Edward himself. I held the letter against my chest, closing my eyes as the warm summer breeze ruffled my hair. I had been reborn into the darkest moment of my past, handed a seemingly impossible hand. But I didn't just survive it, I mastered it. I turned the weapon of my enemies against them and watched their empire burn to the ground. I opened my eyes, looking up at the vast, endless expanse of the starry sky. I am Emma Collins, I thought, a quiet, unstoppable fire burning in my soul, and my real life begins right now. What did you think of Emma's ultimate revenge? She didn't just stop Harper, she destroyed her entire manipulative game from the inside out. If you want to hear more satisfying reborn revenge stories where the villain gets exactly what they deserve, smash that like button. Drop a comment on what you would have done, and don't forget to share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a dramatic story time. See you in the next one.